All right, that was Brennan, who we now know, along with Clapper, got a letter from Devin Nunes, 10 specific questions as it relates to the dossier. Now that all of this is making its way up the ladder in the Obama administration, one thing Devin Nunes is doing today, Paul Sperry had a great column that Nunes is investigating whether the Trump dossier was the basis for Obama's Russiagate intelligence assessment, which, by the way, we need to know because Obama's intelligence community assessment matches the main allegations that were leveled in the Clinton paid dossier that nobody had verified, which wormed their way into the intelligence channels, in addition to the FBI, the Department of Justice, the Department of State, all at the beginning of the campaign in 2016. In fact, the shady dossier makes exactly the same claim that Putin personally ordered the cyber attacks on the Clinton campaign and leaked embarrassing emails to bolster Trump. Now, the person that put those emails out for public review is Julian Assange of WikiLeaks. He's told us multiple times on this show and on TV that it was not Russia. It was no state agency at all. So that would be contradictory to that. Do they have any evidence that it came from Putin? And staff investigators for Devin Nunes and the intelligence community are now going over every single word of the ICA, the intelligence community assessment, including classified footnotes, to see if any of the analysis was pre-cooked based on this phony bought and paid for dossier. And we also have Comey agreeing, by the way, to his first interview since his firing. His book is done, and he's going to appear with George Stephanopoulos. Sure, why not go right directly to Clinton's number one fan in the media? Unbelievable. Joining us now, we have Sara Carter, investigative reporter for the Fox News Channel, and Greg Jarrett, Fox News legal analyst. Welcome, both of you, to the program.
Good to be here. Thank you.
Well, that and now we have this investigation into whether or not this judge in Michael Flynn's case is looking for exculpatory evidence that could have been withheld. But we have a lot going on today. Sara, we'll start with you. What do you make about this piece by Paul Sperry and Nunes investigating whether the dossier was the basis for the Russian intelligence assessment?
Well, I can certainly say with, absolute certainty, talking to sources here in Washington, that they are looking very closely at the assessment and that they're looking directly at Brennan. Remember John Brennan? He was the same, the former chief of the CIA who said in a hearing to Trey Gowdy that he couldn't exactly recall when Trey Gowdy asked him directly whether or not there was an ambassador that had been unmasking Americans. He said, it rings a vague bell, but I can't really remember. And, so here's the same man who has these denials. He's very good at being very careful with his words. And Paul Sperry is right on when he makes the accusation that still there has been no evidence to prove that it was the Russians that actually did the hacking, and they've never been able to prove that with a definitive certainty, showing the actual facts. So I think what's going to happen here is that the House Intelligence Committee is going to look very carefully at this. Remember, they didn't just ask Clapper and Brennan. They also asked Comey the same 10 questions, Sean. And this is going to be vitally important because they're going to have to answer these questions. If they don't, I believe they will be subpoenaed to answer those questions before them because they know now that something went really wrong and that they were using this dossier as a means to investigate the president. And we know now there's a lot of connections with people very close to Hillary Clinton that were involved in this dossier, people like Sidney Blumenthal, others from the State Department that were feeding Christopher Steele information on what they term a second dossier. A lot of people believe that that same information was used in the original dossier that Christopher Steele had. So there is a mess in Washington right now, and I think everybody's trying to sort this out.
This, to me, Greg, is pretty fascinating because you now have Devin Nunes of the House Intel Committee examining whether the vaunted Obama intelligence community assessment claiming that Russia meddled in the presidential election. Now we're examining whether or not that was based on the Clinton bought and paid for phony Russian dossier that nobody had ever verified. And because he's looking at these Obama intelligence assessments and they mirror exactly what's in the dossier. So nobody checked it out. It's used for a FISA warrant and it's used in the intelligence community assessment?
Right. The intelligence community assessment was largely put together by the CIA, the NSA, and the FBI. And I would emphasize the CIA then run by John Brennan. He appears to have played an instrumental role in instigating the Russian hoax and disseminating the fictitious dossier. And in fact, the House Intelligence Committee, who's been probing Brennan's actions, one of their senior aides, and I'll quote here, John Brennan did more than anyone to promulgate the dirty dossier. He politicized and weaponized what was false intelligence against Trump. So what did Brennan do? Well, when he learned of the dossier, he allegedly not just gave it to the FBI and Democrats on Capitol Hill, but certain members of the media were alerted. And according to his testimony before the House Intelligence Committee, Brennan seemed to acknowledge that he was among the first individuals to have access to this dossier, and guess what? Soon thereafter, the FBI was alerted and opened the Trump-Russia investigation. That was never launched because Papadopoulos got drunk in a London pub and started mouthing. I mean, that was preposterous. The New York Times totally got used on that, which just shows, A, how gullible they are, and B, how biased they are to buy into that canard. No, it was the dossier, which was used to try to frame Trump, launching a false investigation, and then spying on Trump associates and continuing to spy after the president took office. It's unbelievable.
Well, go ahead, Sarah.
Another very, very important points that Greg brought up there. And remember, let's go back to when they first briefed then President Obama and then, President Trump as well on the dossier. When that happened, when they briefed President-elect Trump and President Obama on this dossier, it was John Brennan who was there as well. And nobody took this dossier seriously in the media. They were afraid of printing it. It was being shopped all around Washington, D.C. A lot of reporters remember this. Then you had Christopher Steele briefing reporters on the background beforehand. Nobody published the dossier until they made it official, until they went and briefed both presidents on this. They briefed President Trump, President-elect Trump, then President Obama, and shortly afterwards, Sean, is when BuzzFeed published the entire dossier and everybody started to roll with it. They had to make this dossier somehow valid. They had to give it some kind of credence so they could spread this unverified and fallacious dossier.
Sperry makes another point about this because, I think it's very critical that Nunes is asking Brennan and Clapper what he knows in terms of the dossier, and those questions I think will be very revealing if we get answers. But in Sperry's piece, what he's pointing out, is that James Clapper, the director of national intelligence under Obama, conceded in a recent CNN interview that the ICA was based on some of the substantive content of the dossier. And Clapper also admitted he broke with tradition and didn't put out the assessment to all 17 U.S. intelligence agencies for review. And instead, he limited it to just a couple of hand-picked analysts from 3 agencies, the CIA, the NSA, and the FBI. Interestingly, that the report was drafted under the supervision of his office, and all 3 agencies, quote, agreed. But the defense, again, that bypassed the normal procedures. Why would that be?
Well, because, they were pulling a fast one, Clapper and Brennan. At the end of the day, you're going to find out that Clapper, Brennan, and Comey, knew this thing was completely absurd. Rumors, innuendos, supposition, wild speculation. That's why reporters who knew about it and read it laughed at it and wouldn't print it. And that frustrated Clapper and Comey and Brennan. And so they tried to somehow legitimize it, and only when they were able to do that did BuzzFeed finally
print it. And you said you've read it so many times that it makes you laugh every time you read it.
Every time. It never gets old. All
right, stay right there. We got to take a break. More with Greg Jarrett, more with Sarah Carter. 800-941-SEAN, our number. All right, as we continue, Greg Jarrett is with us along with Sarah Carter as we continue our investigation into Deep State Gate, and it gets more interesting by the minute. So you got these additional charges, none of which surprised me as it related to Paul Manafort. And of course, Rick Gates is cutting a deal. The biggest development that I see, though, is this whole issue of the judge in the case of General Flynn. Greg, let's start with you. He's asking for any and all exculpatory evidence, and he will decide what is exculpatory.
That's right. The judge is Emmett Sullivan, very well known, and he was the judge in the Senator Ted Stevens case, the Alaska senator prosecuted for corruption. In the end, it was all tossed out. Why? Because prosecutors cheated, as they often do. They cheated in a way that is really quite unconscionable. They knew that there was exculpatory evidence that would help Stevens, but they deliberately, willfully withheld it. And so, Sullivan, I don't know him, but what I've read of him, he has now this ingrained skepticism toward prosecutors, and he has now demanded that these prosecutors, even though there's been a Flynn guilty plea entered, I'm demanding that you turn over any exculpatory evidence. And I'll tell you what's exculpatory. It appears that there's some evidence that the FBI officials who actually interviewed Flynn, and by the way, they had no business interviewing him. He hadn't done anything wrong.
All right, Sarah, we'll give you let's give Sarah the last word. We're just running out of time.
Okay, sorry.
Well, no, absolutely. I mean, Greg brought up a very good point. I mean, I think with General Flynn's case, if you just go back to the very beginning and you realize that Comey had made the announcement that both of the agents that originally interviewed Flynn had actually not believed he had lied. And they interviewed him anyways when they shouldn't have interviewed him, or they should have shared the transcripts with him. He was doing his job. Then you see the pressure of the special counsel putting pressure on them both financially and threatening apparently his family, threatening his son. And all of a sudden you see people cave in to the special counsel. Look, without Flynn, without Mueller being able to get guilty pleas, Flynn, Papadopoulos, he can't take the next step forward to go after the president. And he used a dossier. This dossier was used to open this investigation. It's an unverified and salacious dossier that has no relevance, and there's over a year we haven't seen any collusion between the president and Russia. And they opened the special counsel investigation, and there are a lot of questions here. And they've been strong-arming people into guilty pleas, and we've seen that. And we're just going to look and see where the next step is. I mean, you played that clip from the beginning. Should the president talk to the special counsel? I'm not a legal expert here, but I would be very concerned about some type of an entrapment.
All right, guys, I got to let you go. Great work as always. We appreciate it.